Do you want to hear directly from the ATO and leaders across the SMSF sector on the latest trends, tools, strategies and more to help you deliver seamless client experiences and generate impressive outcomes for your clients? The SMSF Advisor Technical Strategy Day will do exactly that. Our expert-led sessions will explore the changing legislative and regulatory landscape, arming you with the must-have knowledge to keep ahead, combat risks and reap new opportunities. Visit smsfstrategyday.com.au to learn more about our game-changing sessions and the experts leading them. Tickets are selling out fast, with only a small handful remaining in each state. Don't delay and miss your chance to attend.
This is a Momentum Media production.
The SMSF Advisor Show. Your expert insights into the biggest themes shaping the SMSF advice industry.
Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to the SMSF Advisor Show. I'm joined by my co-host, Aaron Dunn, CEO of Smarter SMSF. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, Miranda. How are you?
Good. Happy new financial year.
Yes, it is a new financial year, plenty of new changes, and I'm about to kick off my SMSF Day event, so plenty of stress over the last little week or so as well. But very much looking forward to getting back out on the road again too.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll be very busy today and over the next few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. So as is always the way with our first segment, we take a look at what's making news. So Miranda, what do we have?
So I think probably the biggest kind of announcement over the last fortnight is probably what the ATO announced in terms of T-bar, that they're moving to a framework where it's going to be quarterly for all SMSFs, but that won't be happening till the 1st of July 2023.
Yeah, so this was something that we saw the ATO put out a consultation paper or went into consultation in December of last year and really putting to the industry feedback around some different methodology in dealing with it. But where we ultimately have fallen is that we will move, as you said, from the 1st of July 2023 to a quarterly reporting timeframe. So 28 days after the quarter, all SMSFs will need to report transfer balance account events. So this is a shift away from the measures that we saw initially introduced, where we had our $1 million TSB threshold. And in that instance, those that were under $1 million were able to undertake the reporting in line with the SMSF annual return each year, so an annual reporting process as opposed to quarterly. So as the industry has really moved along in terms of technology, we've got such a large cohort using sort of cloud-based technology and so forth now. The ATO's view is it's time to kind of make that shift, and therefore, we have this new requirement that is going to be, I think, quite interesting to follow with quarterly reporting from 1 July 2023.
And there's kind of been a bit of a mixed response so far following this announcement. Some sort of said, yes, it's the right thing. It's going to be much simpler just to have one sort of time frame for everyone, but others are sort of saying it's already a headache for them and that they're quite stressed about it. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Yeah,
and I'm sure that the comments on those articles that you've written would have clearly been quite polarizing in the views. And again, this is the differences of practitioners that work in the industry. We have specialist firms, and our guest speaker today, Meg, is a specialist organisation that has a large number of SMSFs that they look after that have systems and processes around dealing with those things versus, we're looking at smaller sole practitioners might have SMSF as part of a broader family group, but they're really potentially only touching that client file once a year. So, there are going to be different businesses that are going to cope much better than others. But, the great equalizer that we have to help facilitate that is the software in this industry. And those that do it and do it well will be able to obviously deal with this matter quite sufficiently, but those that don't will struggle. The interesting thing will be at what point the ATO kind of puts the foot down on the failure to lodge penalties, and that's where I think the next real shake-up will come from.
The other sort of thing that we've been seeing is Labor sort of making a bit of a move with particularly in regard to those advisor education changes announced in the lead up to the election. So they are, as we understand, drafting a legislative instrument for that. While that's sort of more relevant to the broader kind of advisor space, it'll be interesting to see if they start to move on some of the other policies they announced leading up to the election as well.
Yeah, we see government, I think, reconvening towards the end of this month. So, a lot of these sort of promises or measures that the government were going to look to introduce, in particular around, the experience requirement and so forth, we may then start to see some of this stuff come through. Of course, we've kind of got over the top of all this, the quality of advice review as well that we are working through. And at some point, we'll see sort of further information on that. And we're continuing to see, obviously, reporting of information and consultation or feedback from the consultation that has been provided there. So, I think we're about to kind of see the tree shake a little bit and see what falls out once Parliament reconvenes.
So we are starting to sort of see all the sort of quality of advice submissions that came out in response to the issues paper. And another one of the submissions, which perhaps had some more controversial type suggestions, was the industry super one. They sort of suggested that there should be tougher consumer protections on SMSF advice, and in particular the design and distribution obligations be extended to SMSFs.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. So we kind of have Labor now holding office, and then, these sort of industry fund behaviours start to creep back in. Now, what'll be interesting to see is, whether this sort of push around the design and distribution obligations, whether there is any movement around that for SMSS, because there is a lack of uncertainty around how they actually do apply or don't apply in the SMSF landscape. And it would make sense to get absolute clarity on respect to that particular topic as to whether they do or don't apply to SMSF generally. So I think there's an argument here to say, well, the industry Super Australia do want to see increased consumer protections. The DDO obligations there might form part of that, but from an industry point of view, what the SMSF industry would really like to see is to say, well, do those DDO obligations actually apply to SMSFs or not? Give us some clarity so that therefore we can actually take the necessary steps that would need to happen thereafter.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how much they would actually consumers anyway. Bringing that in, it would probably just create more of a headache for the advisors.
Well, you've only got to look at the issues around PDSs and SMSFs and the fact that, doesn't SMSF need to issue PDSs, when you look at things like new members and new SMSFs and pensions and so forth. And this whole argument of, well, is that individual suitably informed, and therefore if they are, they wouldn't need it. So you're kind of throwing a layer of complexity around the requirement for PDSs and adding the design and distribution obligations over the top when there's a big question mark around that PDS requirement anyway. Now, most providers like us at Smarter SMSF issue that PDS because of the fact that, the argument is those trustees and members wouldn't have the skills and information necessarily to understand everything that fund can do. So therefore, if the DDO requirements do come in, well, then the providers like us with a deed would then need to produce that sort of document for those individuals as well. And again, you kind of go, well, how much are they really going to look at that document if they're not spending the amount of time and attention potentially with the PDSs that get issued at the moment?
Yes, that's true. The other thing we saw was ASIC take more action against a number of auditors. So it deregistered 5 auditors and imposed conditions on 3. A couple of those deregistrations were just to do with not filing documents and things like that. But there was one that did audit their own fund. And in terms of the ones that had conditions imposed, there were a couple to do with the new independent standards and not complying with those new standards that are now in force.
Yeah, so I guess we're seeing and continuing to see, I think it wasn't long ago in one of our advisor shows recently, there were further disqualifications of a number of auditors. So the ATO in their role is clearly going to be looking at that cohort of auditors and making sure, in particular, now that we have these new independence requirements that needed to be adhered to, continuing to test those individuals against those requirements, in addition to being suitably skilled and educated in the requirements, not only for SIS compliance, but for audit standards as well. So, there is still, a bit of a cleansing, I guess, that is occurring through that audit profession. Ultimately, it's going to lead to a smaller cohort of auditors, but a much higher standard in terms of those that are undertaking that important work as gatekeeper for the trustees of self-managed super funds.
So we're now going to be joined by Meg Heffron, who is the Managing Director of Heffron. She's going to be taking us through the new work test changes and some of the opportunities that opens up for SMSF clients. She's obviously had years and years of experience in this space, and she's a real expert of that particular topic. So we're now joined by Meg Heffron. Hi, Meg.
Hi, Miranda.
Thanks so much for joining us today. So as we know, there's been some big changes around the work test that came in on 1 July, which basically means that anyone up to the age of 75, or to be exact, 75 plus the 28 days after the end of the month they turn 75, can now make a non-concessional contribution without having to meet that work test anymore. This has obviously opened up a lot of flexibility in terms of what people could do with contributions. So just to start off, what kinds of opportunities does this open up for SMSF clients?
Yeah, you're right, Miranda. I think it does open up a lot. And just pick up on that, on one point you made there. Don't you wish they just picked birthdays for all these critical deadlines?
It's a bit more straightforward.
On earth we have to have X plus 28 days, I will never know. But yes, you're quite right. So non-concessional contributions right up until the 28th of the month after somebody turns 75. Of course, we've still got contribution caps. So even though people are allowed to make these contributions, sometimes the amount they can make might be as low as zero. But philosophically, anybody can make a non-concessional contribution right up until that age. I think there's kind of two streams of opportunities this opens up. So the obvious one is all these people who can now keep adding to their super beyond the point at which they thought they'd have to stop. So, really the fact that you had to have a work test at 67 meant that for a lot of people, contributions pretty much stopped at that time. The fact that we've now got another 8 years when contributions can be made with no work test, you think about all the cases, like somebody who just never got around to their super early enough, and so maybe did a couple of bring forward transactions in the lead up to 67, but still has plenty of scope to do more of those. I was even wondering if we're going to have people who inherit assets or wealth from parents late in life. You have the 90-year-old parent dying, leaving a 65-year-old child. Mm-hmm. Previously, the inheritance you wouldn't have imagined the inheritance going into super because there simply wasn't enough time to get it in there. Now we might. I wonder too whether we have, every now and again you have late in life divorces. Often you'll get non-super assets as part of that settlement. Now you've got an opportunity to put it in. Foreign fund, money being transferred in from foreign funds, people who've sold assets late in life because it makes sense to start selling their investment property late in life because they want to realise the capital, and now they might have an opportunity to put it into super. So I think a whole host of opportunities for people to add to their super in a way that they might not have been able to do in the past.
And Meg, just to sort of expand on that a bit further, I think we're going to see contribution strategies kind of overlap each other. At the same time, we've seen a reduction in the downsizer contribution age down from 65 to 60, but it's all these sort of strategies that will link in with each other, and probably pensions now more than ever are going to intertwine with contributions as well. So just interested in your views on those couple of things.
Oh, for sure. I was trying to think the other day, what are the themes or challenges, both opportunities and challenges with these changes? And I think actually we've always had, a period of time when two different sets of rules apply at the same time. And you've used two good examples there, I think. One is the ability to both be contributing and at the same time drawing pensions. And the second, I think, is the ability to be making both non-concessional and downsizer contributions at the same time. And I think maybe if I start with the second one, I think there's a bit of a clash, potentially a clash between non-concessionals and downsizers, because, of course, the great thing about downsizer contributions is they can be made no matter how big your balance is. But every time you make a non-concessional contribution, you make your balance bigger. So really, in the ideal world, what you want to do, if you're aiming to put as much as you possibly can into super, is you just want to be doing non-concessional contributions for as long as you possibly can, which is now up to 75, and then only do your downsizer after that. Because if you're in danger of bumping up into that $1.7 million total super balance limit, the last thing you want to be doing is making a downsizer contribution at 60 and have that rule you out of non-concessional contributions late in life. So the clash is actually, maybe it's nice to have the opportunity to do it earlier, but the clash is a bit of a problem too, I think. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of the things we see is people who are eligible to make a downsizer but are also still able to make non-concessionals actually make a conscious choice. I know I could use the downsizer rules, but I won't just now. I've got this spare money. I'll put it in as a non-concessional contribution. I'll save my downsizer opportunity for next time, for later, when it's too late or I've got too much in super to put a non-concessional in.
So, sorry, just to go on that, because the lever, I think there is, we've got this lower bar set at 60 years of age. So the scope to potentially meet that 10-year cycle again on you might have the big family home and then you might go to the smaller, home as a retired couple, and then it might move to an aged care or, it might move to some sort of care, self-sufficient, but some sort of facility that, they would then maybe be able to make it at that point in time, like you said, because it's that last resort contribution that you want to do because it's not subject to age and it's not subject to total super balance thresholds.
Yeah, actually, that's a good way to describe it, that last resort contribution. And we might now have the time for people to do their have one downsizer opportunity at 60, but then buy another home that they own for another 20 years and then have another downsizer opportunity 20 years later. And as long as they didn't use it the first time, they could potentially put their downsizer in at 80, having maximised their non-concessionals from 60 up to 75. So the other one you picked up on, Aaron, was this idea of pensions and contributions all happening at the same time. And, of course, we've always had that. And in SMSFs in particular, I think, because there's, typically, you tend to see really good planning often in an SMSF. And so often really good planning means contributions and pensions all happening at the same time. But that used to happen in those in a fairly narrow window, 60 to 67 maybe. And now it's possibly going to happen 60 all the way up to 75. And, there's just a bunch of little things that can trip you up there, I think. A simple one might be you have standing instructions, that the member has standing instructions to the trustee, which says, look, if I'm taking more than my minimum pensions, I'd like the excess drawing to come from my accumulation account. But of course, that's the last thing you want to do if what you're adding to your accumulation account is non-concessional contributions. You'd probably rather be taking a partial commutation from your pension, which might be, 100% taxable component, letting your non-concessionals build up in your accumulation account and periodically starting a new pension with whatever transfer balance cap space you've created. So, even rethinking some of those little tweaks we often put in as really good planning, we probably need to rethink them in that period where we're doing contributions and pensions at the same time.
You've mentioned some interesting points there about weighing up different strategies and also the considerations. Is there anything else that SMSF professionals and their clients should be thinking about when thinking about different strategies and any potential sort of traps?
Oh, actually, good question, because I think there is one trap that I've sort of bumped into a couple of times in thinking about how this might play out for clients. And that's what I'd call the sort of the danger zone of making mistakes. So I'll just use one example. So say you had a client who thought they met the downsizer rules and they were planning to make a downsizer contribution. But their total super balance is too big to make non-concessionals. And they're 72, not meeting any work tests. So in the past, they make a downsizer contribution, thinking they've met the rules, only to discover later that they didn't. So that's okay. Now it turns into a non-concessional contribution. They're not allowed to make a non-concessional contribution in the past because they didn't meet the work test, and it gets shot straight back out again. Wouldn't work that way now because they're still allowed to make a non-concessional contribution. It's in excess of their cap, which is 0. So some of the natural sort of handbrakes we had on mistakes in the past will effectively disappear now that we've got more flexibility.
And the other one, Meg, I think that's quite interesting, talking about, starting pensions with money that's coming in and with recontributions coming out, is if we are making any deductible contributions, noting that, of course, the work test now sits in the Tax Act rather than an acceptance requirement, timing of notices is also critical.
Oh, totally, yes. And actually, that sort of brings us to the whole other series of opportunities, really, doesn't it, which is the recontribution strategies. I think they will absolutely become a lot more common because we'll have a longer time frame to do them than we've ever had before. But your point about, if you're putting money in and taking money out all at the same time, the last thing you want is a contribution going into your accumulation account that you're intending to claim a tax deduction for, and you're also starting pensions or taking money out of that account and you haven't done your notice. All of a sudden your deduction, if you started a pension, your deduction gets denied. And if you've taken money out, maybe your deduction gets scaled back. So, yeah, it's another one of those situations, isn't it, where some extra flexibility and some changes that are fundamentally really good for SMSF clients just open up some new opportunities for stuffing things up. Actually, I shouldn't say just. At the same time, they open up opportunities.
Very true.
All right. We've covered a lot of ground, but was there anything else that you thought might be worth thinking about for SMSF professionals?
Look, mainly, I think a couple of things, probably mainly around recontributions. So I think, we've always had recontributions. They probably declined a little bit post, a couple of rule changes ago when it became harder to get non-concessional contributions in. It became easier to take money out, but harder to get it back in again. I think what we will find now that we've got this really long time period when people both have access to their super because they're either eligible to start a transition to retirement pension or they're over 65, so their super's totally free, and yet they can still turn around and put it back in again. They've got another 10 years after that to keep putting it back in again. I think what that does is it just means we'll have recontributions will just come back to life in a way. They'll become a lot more common than they ever were before. And I guess my thinking for fellow practitioners in SMSFs is to sort of revisit those clients where you might have decided it wasn't worth it. We're not going to bother, and think, well, actually now I've got an opportunity to do it. Maybe I will.
Meg, we could talk for hours on this stuff, and I know we do generally. So, but your insights, once again, have been fascinating for our audience. So on behalf of Miranda and I and everyone that listens to our SMSF Advisor show, it's great to have you back on. You were our very first guest on this show.
Was I really?
This is now episode 38. So it's only taken, the best part of a year or so to get you back. And it won't be a year before we get you back again, I hope. So thank you once again. And no doubt we'll see you in the not too distant future.
Thanks very much, both of you.
Thank you.
So Miranda, always wonderful to catch up with Meg. She is a wealth of knowledge, and you can just hear it in her voice, the passion that she actually has for these types of strategies. What was the main takeaway that you got from our session today?
Yeah, this is amazing, just from those couple of changes, just how many different ways there sort of are to add value to clients in terms of all those different strategies and how they sort of interact with each other as well.
Yeah, and that's the real crux of SMSF, isn't it, when you think about this? The strategies that come out of these things, I always sort of say, one door closes, but it kind of blows out all these windows out the back of the house. So, and it's, these sort of changes have done that. We're not only looking at, what it means from an NCC point of view, but we're now interchanging pensions and with recontribution strategies and combining it with downsizes and so forth. And so I think Meg touched on a really good point at the end of the session, is that you should be going back to your clients and revisiting those circumstances, because the door may have been shut previously on some of those clients, where we now do have that extended time period around looking at strategies. Recontributions is the obvious one, in addition to contributions more generally, that we didn't have previously. And these strategic opportunities obviously can make a pretty significant difference to those SMSF clients, but equally many of those strategies apply to non-SMSFs as well.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting too how she sort of highlighted the importance of thinking about the order of things in terms of do the non-concessional contribution maybe first and leave the downsizer as I think she said, a last resort.
Yeah.
Further down the line.
Yeah.
And just some of the sort of, I guess there used to be a bit more of a safety mechanism there that's now gone as well. So that's another thing to sort of be aware of.
Yeah. So explore the opportunities, but manage some of the risks around them, I think, is really important.
Yeah, exactly.
So, as is always the way, if anyone of our listeners has any suggestions on topics or speakers, Miranda, where can they get in contact with us?
So they can get in contact at editor@smsfadvisoronline.com.au.
Excellent. Well, thank you once again for joining us for our SMSF Advisor Show. Hope you have a great rest of the week, and we look forward to you joining us for our next episode. Take care and bye for now.
Imagine being rushed to hospital.
Yep.
And your life changing in an instant. Imagine going through hundreds of tests and 46 weeks of chemo. Now imagine you're a child. That's why Starlight exists. To bring happiness to seriously ill children. Please donate at starlight.org.au.